At 0247 hours, a Russian patrol boat detected something no one could explain: 5 objects slicing through the night sky toward Crimea's most protected airspace. Within minutes, missiles were fired, radars overloaded, and the unthinkable happened. Drones costing less than a smartphone were tearing apart a billion-dollar defense network. How could the most advanced systems in Russia's arsenal fail against tools built from hobby parts? Tonight, we break down the real science, the tactical errors, and the physics that made Crimea's shield collapse in under 20 minutes. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not science fiction. It's the future of warfare, already unfolding. At 0247 local time, a Russian patrol boat off the Crimean coast picked up a faint return on its radar. Something small, fast, and climbing through the darkness. The signature made no sense. The system labeled it as unknown, then lost it. When the contact reappeared seconds later, there were 5 of them, low over the water, closing in on Crimea's most restricted airspace. Inside the operations cabin, the watch officer called it out: possible drones inbound, direction northwest. Seconds later, the radar went blind again. What followed would expose a design flaw buried deep within Russia's air defense network, a flaw no simulation had ever revealed. In the drone control room hundreds of miles away, the Ukrainian operator watched his monitor burst with light. 5 Russian missiles cut across the screen, streaking through the night sky. 30 million rubles of precision engineering fired in panic. When the smoke cleared, the target feed showed the impossible. The drones were still flying, completely untouched. Now deep inside Crimean airspace, these FPV drones had one mission: reach Mount Ary and eliminate the radar network defending it. But before they could strike, they had to survive the most advanced point defense weapon in Russia's arsenal, the Panzer S-1. Positioned on the beaches below, its radar dish spun frantically, locking onto targets that weren't there. The Panzer was no obsolete relic. It was modern, deadly, designed to destroy cruise missiles at close range. Yet in the next 3 minutes, it would waste 30 million rubles worth of missiles on drones that cost less than an iPhone and still miss every shot. What happened next revealed a weakness not in Russian courage, but in physics itself. As the smoke drifted across the beach, the Panzer operator slammed his controls in disbelief. His radar still showed a clean sweep. No valid targets, no threat warning, just empty air. Yet his thermal display told a different story. Glowing specks darting just above the waves, closing fast. He switched modes. The guns came alive, twin 30mm cannons spitting tracers into the dark. Each shell tore across the horizon like fiery comets, beautiful but utterly useless. Not a single round connected. The operator was fighting ghosts. What he did not realize was that the drones were exploiting a fundamental principle of radar physics, the Doppler notch. His radar did not simply detect objects, it measured how fast they moved toward or away from it, a value called radial velocity. When an object flies sideways across the radar beam perpendicular, not inbound or outbound, its radial velocity drops to nearly 0. To the computer, a target moving at 0 velocity looks just like the ground, so it gets filtered out as background clutter. In essence, the radar could no longer distinguish the drones from the sea itself. Even worse, the water's surface reflected radar waves back upward, creating ghost echoes beneath every real target. The system's computer, overwhelmed, tried to average the drone with its reflection and ended up aiming missiles into empty air between them. Each proximity fuse needed half a square meter of radar reflection to trigger. These drones gave back less than 1/100th of that. The missiles literally did not recognize them as valid targets. The operator stared at his screens, his expensive weapon now nothing more than a tower of electronics and smoke. Then the thermal feed bloomed again, more contacts appearing, multiple vectors converging, a swarm. The Panzer's radar could detect them at 2 kilometers, but its missile warheads needed at least 1.5 to arm. That gave him roughly 12 seconds to engage targets his radar could not see, moving faster than the system could think. Radio chatter filled the airwaves. Controllers demanded fighter support. The operator's report was brief and chilling. Multiple contacts, unable to engage. At that moment, the war for Mount Ary was no longer about weapons. It was about perception, who could see and who could not. At 0250 hours, the call went out. Russian command scrambled a fighter from the nearest airfield, a Sukhoi Su-30 fast, agile, and newly built. This was the aircraft Russia often compared to the American 15, equipped with thrust vectoring and a radar that, in theory, could track a golf ball in space. It tore through the pre-dawn haze, its engines howling as it descended toward Mount Ary. The pilot's bar's radar began scanning, sweeping the sea below. At first, the scope looked normal, just coastal reflections and civilian clutter. Then, faintly, contacts appeared and vanished. There 1 second, gone the next. The radar's computer needed 5 consecutive hits to confirm a track. These new targets gave 2, maybe 3, before dropping below the noise floor. The noise floor, the background static that every radar naturally detects, was now the drone's greatest ally. Their radar signatures were so faint that each return blended into the background after a heartbeat. The computer reset, trying again, always chasing ghosts that dissolved before it could lock on. Frustrated, the pilot fired anyway. An R-73 missile dropped from the wing, its motor igniting into a streak of orange fire. It accelerated to Mach 2.5 in seconds, slicing through the air toward the nearest target. For a moment, the drone's thermal camera caught everything the missile seeker had flickering, closing, then veering off like it had lost interest. The reason was temperature. The R-73 was built to hunt jet engines, burning at nearly 1,000 degrees Celsius. These electric drone motors ran at barely 50 little warmer than a laptop. The missile's infrared seeker could not see them until it was within 500 meters, and by then it was moving too fast to adjust. The pilot tried again. Another missile, then another. Each one missed, unable to turn sharply enough to hit something so small, so erratic. At 2 kilometers, a target jinking every few seconds outmaneuvered physics itself. In under 3 minutes, the Su-30 had burned through 80 million rubles worth of weapons. Its radar failed, its missiles blind. Desperate, the pilot turned to his last resort, the 30mm GS cannon. At 02:52 hours, the Su-30 lined up for another pass. The pilot switched to guns, the aircraft shuddering as the 30mm GS cannon opened up 1,500 rounds per minute of tungsten fire. But the tracers curved harmlessly into the darkness, missing every target. The problem wasn't aim, it was prediction. The fighter's fire control computer calculated lead angles based on linear motion. It assumed the target would keep flying straight, but these drones didn't. Every 2 seconds, each shifted unpredictably 2 or 3 meters to either side. Small movements, barely visible, but by the time the rounds traveled a kilometer, that deviation had become a 10-meter miss. The computer was always a second behind a problem that changed every second. Down below, one drone had already reached its target, a radar-designated 96L6E NATO codename Cheeseboard. Mounted on its vehicle chassis, this system served as the eyes of the S-400 network, tracking 100 aerial targets at once and linking their coordinates to missile batteries miles away. Without it, the launchers were blind. At 02:54, the drone-shaped charge detonated against the antenna array. A copper jet moving 8 kilometers per second tore through delicate electronics, shorting circuits that were never meant to connect. In less than a blink, millions of dollars in equipment became molten debris. The Su-30 pilot saw the explosion through his canopy, his instruments flashing warnings as radar contact vanished from his scope. Fuel low, missiles gone. He pulled hard skyward and radioed the report. Loss of radar asset, returning to base. His voice, flat and professional, could not hide the weight of failure. Below him, more drones poured toward Mount Ary unopposed. Their video feeds, streamed through encrypted links, showed the mountain's summit glowing in infrared domes, radar arrays, communications towers. Each structure a target, each hit another blow against the command network guarding the Black Sea. Then something strange appeared on radar. New contacts materializing 10 kilometers off the coast, not flying in from Ukraine, but rising from the sea itself. As dawn crept over the Black Sea, Russian radar operators watched their screens in disbelief. New contacts were appearing out of nowhere 10 kilometers offshore, hovering just above the waves. They hadn't come from Ukrainian territory, they had materialized. Ground control double-checked the data. The readings were real, but they were impossible. The truth, however, was brutally simple. While Russia's defenses had focused on the sky, the real threat had been waiting just beyond the radar's blind zone, small, unmanned boats hidden by the curvature of the Earth and the limitations of geometry itself. At roughly 3,600 feet elevation, the Podlet K-1 radar atop Mount Ary could detect aircraft at hundreds of kilometers. Yet it had a minimum depression angle of -2 degrees. That meant it physically couldn't see anything below 43 meters of altitude within 10 kilometers of shore. Those boats, cruising at 5 meters above the water, were invisible by design. They weren't evading radar, they were sailing through a gap that physics had carved into the defense grid. On those boats, operators weren't even present. These were part of the Ursula family remote-controlled sea platforms equipped with drone racks, tall antennas, and encrypted data links. For 2 hours they had been waiting, engines idling, invisible to every system that was supposed to protect Crimea's coast. When the first Ukrainian drones crippled the S-400 radar, the sea platforms began launching the next wave. Electric motors spun up with a sound like angry hornets. Each new FPV drone rose into the air, scattering in random directions before turning toward Mount Ary. The question many analysts later asked was how these drones were even controlled from so far away. The answer was elegant relay boats. Instead of a single radio link stretching from Odessa to Crimea, Ukraine used a chain of floating repeaters. These boats acted as mobile cell towers, bridging long distances with Starlink or high-powered radio links. Commands traveled from operators in Odessa to the boats, then to the drones. Video feeds returned the same way, nearly instant. It was a system built not on brute force, but on clever architecture. Precision, simplicity, and physics turned to advantage. By 02:59 hours, the second wave was already inbound. Dozens of drones, each smaller than a suitcase, closing in from every angle. The radar domes atop Mount Ary, those great white spheres that once symbolized Russian dominance over the Black Sea, now glowed on infrared feeds like beacons. One drone after another dove toward them. The first hit came at the base of the largest dome, an access hatch built for maintenance crews. Reinforced, yes, but never designed for direct impact from a shaped charge. The copper jet, focused to a pinpoint, pierced the steel like paper, detonating inside. The next strike hit the Nebo M radar. Russia's crown jewel, the system said to detect stealth fighters 600 kilometers away. Its destruction crippled every S-400 battery across Crimea. Those missile systems could now see only as far as their onboard sensors allowed 40, maybe 50 kilometers. Beyond that, the sky became a blank canvas. In under 3 minutes, every major radar on the mountain was either burning or silent. The sea-based drones kept coming. Each launch platform sent its remaining payloads skyward before retreating. The airwaves filled with broken transmissions, controllers shouting over one another, operators reporting lost targets, radar techs begging for new coordinates that no longer existed. At 0300 hours, the Podlet K-1 radar, the final link in the chain, took multiple hits to its transmitter array. The strike triggered cascading electrical surges, waveguides overloading, amplifiers melting under their own current, years of engineering unraveled in seconds. 3 kilometers away, a BK-16 landing craft opened fire with deck guns and rifles, a futile act of defiance. The thermal footage from the attacking drones captured every muzzle flash and then nothing. Finally, the E-Tree command post took a direct hit. Flames erupted from its entrance, followed by a deep explosion, secondary detonations from fuel or ammunition. The brain of Western Crimea's air defense network ceased to exist. Radar acquisition, fire control, and missile guidance, all gone. Every system blind, every operator isolated. For the first time since the war began, an entire region's defense grid collapsed not from a bombardment, not from sabotage, but from a handful of consumer-grade drones and a flawless understanding of physics. Mount Ary went dark. Crimea, for those few hours, was blind. When the fires on Mount Ary finally dimmed, the silence was more revealing than the explosions that caused it. Every destroyed radar, every lost frequency link told the same story: power no longer belongs to whoever has the biggest missiles, but to whoever understands the smallest signals. This was not just a Ukrainian success or a Russian failure. It was a demonstration of evolution, how 21st century warfare is decided by code, geometry, and creativity rather than brute strength. If this analysis helped you see the battlefield differently, subscribe and enable notifications. Because every week, we uncover another event, reshaping modern warfare one unseen signal at a time.